Today's lesson is on environmental problems. Here's your joke for this lesson. So the origin of many environmental problems start in the late 1700s with the Industrial Revolution. This isn't to say that humans have been perfect since before that time, but realistically, Industrial Revolution really starts off our pollution problem. Many people began to rely more and more on machines, as you've learned about most likely in humanities class. As they're relying on these machines, more harmful substances enter the air, the water, and the soil. So we have exhaust from factories. We're burning more coal to power the machines. It's getting pretty dirty and nasty, and that's the start of our major environmental problems. So pollution is one of our environmental problems, and today's machines produce less pollution, but the dilemma we have is we have more machines than before. So many families own cars, we have machines in factories requiring electricity, so we have power plants that the majority of power plants in our country are still doing things like burning coal or natural gas to produce electricity, which gives off pollution. And so pollution is an unwanted change in the environment caused by substances such as wastes or forms of energy such as radiation. Some pollution is natural. Volcanic eruptions give off a large amount of pollution. There's nothing we can do about that. We're not going to be able to cap a volcano and prevent it from erupting. But so much more pollution comes from human-made causes, whether that's cars, industry, agriculture, so many sources. So garbage, big source of pollution. The average American throws away more trash than the average person in any other nation. So the average American throws away 4.4 pounds of trash per day. 1/3 of that can get recycled, usually, although restrictions from China has probably limited that. And so that's almost 3 pounds per day to the landfill, which works out to each American generating over 1,000 pounds per person per year of trash that we throw away. And landfills, although they try to not accept these items, contain medical waste, electronic waste, and other hazardous materials throughout them, which has the potential, but not necessarily is, leaking into groundwater and surrounding soils. So we have to be careful what we throw in our landfills. Humans produce hazardous wastes as well. These include flammables, so things that can catch on fire, corrosives, things that can eat through metal, explosive materials, items that can make people sick. So there's some metals in computers and other electronics that can be harmful to the environment. Paint in a liquid form is not helpful to water quality. The spiral CFL bulbs in the past have contained mercury, which is harmful to humans and the environment. Batteries contain lithium, especially the rechargeable ones. We have medical waste, we have bleach, we have fertilizer, we have motor oil. All these things can be really harmful to our environment and make people sick. Some other chemicals. So people need to use many chemicals in today's society. And historically, there are 2 groups of harmful chemicals that have been used, and I'm sure we'll find more in the future. CFCs. These were used in aerosols, refrigerators, and plastics. And so for a while they were used widespread, and they destroy the protective ozone layer in the Earth's atmosphere. So by using these things, they became airborne, part of our atmosphere, and actually broke down that ozone layer, which meant that more harmful radiation from the sun could reach Earth. PCBs were used in appliances and paints, and these we found out were poisonous and cancer causing. So both of these types of substances have been banned. CFCs still are lingering in our atmosphere, although their concentration is decreasing and the ozone layer is getting healthier. And PCBs are still found even in remote areas where maybe they weren't first used on our planet. Fertilizers, these are important. They help plants grow. Most likely, if you have a lawn, your parents are putting fertilizers on the lawn. And in appropriate amounts, totally fine to be using. It's when there's excess fertilizer that runs off of farm fields or your lawn into the sewers, into the rivers, that it becomes really dangerous. So fertilizers help plants grow, so when it gets into streams or lakes, it helps algae grow in the water. As the algae grows really big, it becomes overpopulated and it loses its resources and it dies and starts to decompose, and those decomposers use up the oxygen in the water as they decompose the algae, creating a spot without any dissolved oxygen in the water, and fish die because there's no more oxygen in the water. High-powered wastes or radioactive or nuclear wastes, these are also present. So nuclear power plants, they're great. Fairly low emissions. The smoke you see coming out of those two cooling towers is actually steam that is not radioactive. So that's not a big deal to the environment. The problem with nuclear power plants is they produce radioactive waste. And some radioactive waste produced by nuclear power plants can take thousands of years to become harmless. So if you think about that, America's been around a little over 200 years. We need to protect the nuclear waste for thousands of years and safely store it. So that's a long time to deal with the waste from producing power today. Gases. So gas, our atmosphere is made of gas. It's mostly nitrogen, but there's some carbon dioxide, oxygen, and some other gases in it. The atmosphere is a protective blanket, essentially, on the Earth that keeps us warm enough for life to exist. So the amount of carbon dioxide that's historically been in the atmosphere has helped to trap enough heat to keep life as we know it on the planet. But when we add excess carbon dioxide and other gases like methane, which can come from raising animals, these act like a greenhouse, trapping heat around the Earth, and this will increase the temperature of the Earth. So this is why global warming has a lot of man-made causes, is because we are producing carbon dioxide and methane through our practices that's increasing the amount of heat trapped around the Earth, making the Earth warmer. Noise pollution. Some pollution affects the senses. So noise pollution can affect an organism's ability to hear and think clearly. So it can disrupt normal patterns of organisms as they are exposed to more noises, such as airplane traffic, such as automobile traffic on freeways, things like that. Humans have also transported species around the globe. So we've done this either intentionally or unintentionally, that we have moved plant seeds, animal eggs, and adult organisms from one part of the world to the other. Some examples are the fish known as a carp, was seen as a sport fish and was brought over from Asia. The tree of heaven that we have tried to eradicate from our riparian area is also another exotic species that was brought in. There are so many exotic species that we have brought from where it started to here around our homes. So an exotic species is an organism that makes a home for itself in a new place outside of its native home. And exotic species can thrive in new environments often because they typically don't have predators or things that will limit their growth. So they're going to be there because nothing necessarily knows it can eat them. And so as they are expanding their populations, they compete with native species for resources and can sometimes outcompete native species because they don't have the predators. Human population growth is another huge thing for our planet. In 1800, there were 1 billion people on Earth, and 200 years later, there are more than 6 billion people on Earth. So advances in farming and medicine have made this possible. We are now able to feed more people, and people are able to live longer. So more and more people are staying alive on our planet. So overpopulation is the presence of too many individuals in an area for their available resources. And this is happening in parts of our planet. And if the population continues to grow, it will happen all over our planet. And so some good news is the population is continuing to grow, but the exponential growth that you see in the graph on this slide is not as exponential anymore. It is moving more towards a linear growth, which means the growth rate is declining. It means we are still adding people to our planet, just not quite as quickly. So there is some hope for human population growth. And currently in 2020, we are at about 7.5 billion people on our planet. And then one of the last things we're going to talk about is habitat destruction. So people need homes, food, building materials. They need to fulfill their basic human needs. And part of this involves clearing land for construction, so getting lumber, mines to get the precious resources, minerals, metals that we need. We need to clear land to grow crops or to raise things like cattle. And so this can negatively affect the soil. And through mining and some other things, chemicals can pollute surface and groundwater, making that resource contaminated and less available for us to use. And clearly, when you see something like that picture in the top right corner of the slide, organisms are going to be displaced when you clear all the forest off, especially if you do it on a large scale. So habitat destruction can have a huge impact. So with forest habitats, some positive things: trees provide humans with oxygen, lumber, food. Rubber comes from trees, and so does paper. Today, companies are often replanting trees after harvesting them, and this is a really good thing, especially when you look at the paper industry. So many companies in the paper industry are replanting trees right after they cut them, which is great. Unfortunately, they typically plant trees that will be good for a harvest in the future, and so we are losing biodiversity, which is that variety of organisms that helps to show that an ecosystem is healthy. In tropical rainforests, those are being cleared for farmland, roads, and lumber. So that's a pretty big deal because cleared tropical rainforests cannot grow as diverse as it once was. Sometimes there are species that only live in a really small area in a tropical rainforest. So if you start clearing that out, you're going to lose species that you may not even know were there. And typically in a tropical rainforest, thin soils are poor soils to grow food on, and they can even be more badly damaged by clear. And then marine habitats. Oil spills are a point source pollution that affects open and coastal waters. These happen, unfortunately, more frequently than I think we'd like. And point source pollution is a pollution that comes from one source. So you can see in that picture at the top right that that oil rig is leaking something into the ocean. And you can point right to it and say that's where the pollution is coming from. But there's also non-point source pollution, and this happens when chemicals on land are washed into rivers, lakes, and oceans. And some non-point source pollution sources are things like fertilizer or pesticides and insecticides. And then also plastics pollute ocean habitats. And one thing that happens with those is not only do you see garbage floating around in the ocean or washing up on beaches, but as it goes through the waves and the surf, it breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, and marine organisms can sometimes eat it and become sick. So those are some examples of human impacts on the environment. It's not all doom and gloom, but humans aren't always a really positive impact on our planet. And I think we need to do more to address that. And in future lessons, we will look at ways that humans can be a more positive species on our planet.